Evening, everybody. Evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're gonna go.
Hold on, it's still loading.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Are we going to say our names, Alison?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Or however you wish to present or to introduce us?
Sure. So I guess we're live now on Facebook. So welcome everybody. We're officially going to get started in about 3 minutes, but we went ahead and did it now so that we could share the link out with folks. So I'm going to do that right now. Just hold on for a couple more minutes before our official start. Jason, I'm not seeing.
I should have allowed screen sharing. You should be able to.
I'm just not seeing it on your Facebook page. Is it supposed to show up?
Oh, refresh, maybe refresh. I even tagged you in it, so.
I know, but my stuff doesn't go on my feed unless I manually add it.
Let me see if I can grab a link and send it to you.
No. Oh, there it is. Okay. Hey, thanks for. I know, but my stuff. 1 second.
Yeah, just bring the volume down if you're going to let it play. So if you're just joining us, I'm Jason Bosch, and we're here with Allison McDowell, Andy Libson, Kenny Zepeda, and Eduardo Abarca. And I'd like you guys, maybe I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, but we wanted to do.
I just shared it out. So
yeah, you go for it.
Yeah. So, well, thanks. We're doing a little bit of an impromptu. This is officially an episode of What's Left. That normally broadcasts out of Oakland. So I don't know, Andy, do you wanna, or Eduardo, you're often the introducer.
Sure. Well, this partnership is wonderful, by the way. We're What's Left with Andy Libson and Kenny Zepeda, a community organizer, socialist, and teacher in San Francisco, but we do broadcast from Oakland, don't we? Since you're the one
sorry, I forgot. Yeah.
No, it's all right.
Greater Bay Area, greater technocracy.
Yes.
The municipal Silicon Valley Municipal District.
So we're a podcast-less channel, and we hold discussions challenging the mainstream left. And you can find us on BitChute, Odyssey, Libri, and iTunes Podcast, Google Play, Stitcher. And we'll post a link on the description box below, wherever anyone is listening or watching this, whether it be Facebook or on YouTube or Facebook. Andy, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, just to say that Allison has been central in shaping really our understanding, my understanding, I think Kenny and Eduardo, I guess I can speak for you, of what this last year has really been about, in terms of everyone else has been thinking that this whole moment is about COVID and a virus, and to really understand that this is about Fourth Industrial Revolution, the Great Reset, Silicon Valley, Wall Street profits, and a changed world, a changed world for work, and therefore a changed world for education. And teachers, a lot of teachers are thinking when we go back to the school, as we go to hybrid, that we're moving to hybrid to go back to in-person eventually. And the reason I know that's not the case is because of a lot of work that Allison has done to help me see these things that are going on, that this hybrid thing we're going to is a transition to pretty much a full online experience in education for the most part. And so it's really been helpful for me. And I'm going to be a student today in class, to be honest, even though I'm an educator and have seen.
Well, it's a collaboration because you have you're in the, you're in that world and you're on the ground, where you're at in the belly of the beast. So it's really valuable. Kenny? And
Kenny, you want to introduce yourself?
No, I just wanted to second what you said, Andrew, that, just being in touch with Allison, I've had more answers to the questions I had, when COVID and things were changing around us. And so I am very honored and to share this space with you, Allison. And also want to warn people that talking to Allison sometimes throws you into a week-long mental space where you will have a lot of thinking to do. And but at the same time, I think I find more answers. It makes sense of the world that's taking shape without our consent, really.
Cool. And So, and Jason, you're hosting us today on Argustfest, so we're very grateful for that. So
Yes.
thank you for your technical support.
You're welcome.
So, so I guess I'll just to get started, because it's 8:30, and I apologize. My notifications are supposed to be on silent, but they're not. So that's my technical problem, but I can't fix it. I haven't been able to fix it yet. So, tonight's focus is going to be on some dyslexia legislation that is sort of advancing fast track in the state of California, but that I think is actually part of a larger program that is linking literacy screening for young children entering kindergarten, first and second grade, into this larger biocapitalist human capital bond space that's linked to the pay for success stuff. And so I put together a slide share that I'm going to put together, I'm going to pull up now. Let me see. And let me just make it presentable. Okay, so can you guys see that now?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. So, I was talking with someone who had it on their radar that bill, I think it's Senate Bill 237, was being fast-tracked around dyslexia. And there were a number of red flags about the bill itself, not per se about the need to provide supports for students who have challenges or learning differences around literacy, but around the nature of this particular bill and how it was being rolled out, not simply as providing additional resources to schools to support them in literacy instruction and screening, but to actually compel all children within 90 days of the start of school in kindergarten, first and second grade to be risk profiled with identifiable sort of digital learning tools into these potential scoring for dyslexia. And so at the end of having this discussion, the first thing that came to mind, I'm sure that there's a cost offset somewhere here for human capital finance. I'm sure that this is not just about dyslexia, but this is about something more. There's something more going on in this space. And so this is a slide, it's from last February. So again, February 13th, 2020, just a few, a month before the whole, pandemic lockdown scenario rolled out. And Gavin Newsom is identifying that he wants more dyslexia screenings and services for California students, which sounds perfectly wonderful, right? Like, who wouldn't want kids to get what they need? They should get what they need. Also on this slide, I have an image from Decoding Dyslexia. There's a very active chapter that's in partnership with this legislation in California, but it's actually in all 50 states and now in 4 Canadian provinces and growing. And they take great pains all over their websites to identify themselves as grassroots, which seems a bit like it feels like they doth protest a bit much. And clearly, most of the people I think who are involved and active in this space are parents who have concerns for their kids or educators who have concerns for kids. And, I fully believe that most of them are not aware of the larger program around educational technology and apps and data tracking kids, not necessarily so that they get what they need, but that they create children as data dashboards that they're not getting what they need. So this is the bill itself. It's currently under consideration. Let's see, it says that there was a hearing on March 22nd. And so it's sort of in process. And the focus of this was essentially, let me see, my screens are a little bit different. If you see at the bottom there, it says the title is Special Education Dyslexia Risk Screening. So this legislation is not actually about diagnosing children who are assumed to have dyslexia. It's not a diagnostic tool. What they are proposing is that all of the children in California, which is a massive number of kids in these first grades, kindergarten, first and second, be risk profiled for literacy. And to me, that is very different. If you didn't read the fine print, if you didn't sort of have a skeptical hat on looking at this, you might think it's great, but it actually is risk screening, not diagnosis. So I'm curious for you guys, and this is just sort of framing context. When I was, talking with folks about this bill and imagining what a bill would look like that actually provided children what they needed, some of the things that I was imagining, if you really cared to make sure that all of the children in California got an equal shot at having their needs met in achieving true literacy, you would make sure that you could reduce class sizes, right? You would have lower class sizes in kindergarten, first and second, or you would have more certified literacy support staff, that could pull kids out who needed that. Or you would have really robust and culturally appropriate books in your classroom and a school library with a librarian, which is what I had growing up. We had a certified librarian and a library that was well stocked with books that we wanted to read. And I had a suspicion when I pulled up this image. Philadelphia is now down to, I think we have maybe 10 certified librarians left in a district of several hundred schools. And it appears that in Oakland, which is one of the districts that really has a lot of support backing this legislation, there's a lot of interest from the Oakland NAACP around this dyslexia screening bill. So when I was looking at Oakland, here's a petition. I'm not sure if it's current, but they're talking about that 14 of the 17 high school libraries are closed. Now this is high school, it's not elementary school, but I would presume that might filter down. Do you guys have a sense of from what you've seen or heard from people? I know, Andy, you're not in the elementary school space, but from maybe your colleagues in the teachers union, what it looks like there in terms of what classroom conditions for literacy?
Well, I can speak to a few things as it relates to our school, say, like Mission High School, which is in San Francisco. First off, our librarian, we do have a librarian, but that librarian is increasingly becoming a dedicated tech person. And the actual physical books are leaving, and more things are going online. So that's one trend, I would say. And I do think that the librarian pool of people around, that's going to be part of a my belief is that's going to be part of a consolidation process, where we're going to have fewer and fewer librarians in libraries, and those are going to be seen as unnecessary when you can read on a Chromebook, and things like that. As it relates to the literacy, is still something we talk about, definitely. But I would just say that the things you've mentioned of smaller class sizes and things like that are not the way that things are going. It's becoming larger classes, and in addition, there's been the idea of more not even having us. I don't know if you want me to get into this, but increasingly special education is being blended in with mainstream education, and special education teachers who might be serving one-on-1 or one-on-5 students are now almost more like case managers of 1-on-28 as those students are filed into a general education population. So I feel that's what's happening. And there's a social justice angle to that, to say, we don't want to segregate students, but in reality, it's a cost-saving device, where more and more features of special education and employees of special education, we're losing those people, and more of those jobs more and more of those duties are falling to the general education teacher. And I will tell you, as a general education teacher, the individualized education plans that are for those students who need them, I don't think I'm meeting their needs when I have 28, 29, 30 kids in a class, and 6 or 7 of them have IEPs, individualized education plan. So that's the trend that I'm seeing.
And I can attest, having worked in elementary school, I can just attest to what Andy is saying, that, under the guise of being more inclusive, they are trying to integrate students, and they're losing that support. And to this point here, it's normally PTAs and volunteers that are keeping afloat the libraries in schools. It's unfortunate, but I do see a trend of slowly losing our libraries.
What about reading material? Is it, at this point, is it more screen-based?
It's moving that way.
Yeah, using iPads and Chromebooks, definitely. This is something that even with in-person classes that are coming up here in San Francisco, the 12th of April, that students will be going in part-time, they're still planning to use, even as we're going to in-person, we're planning to still use tech and Zoom and all kinds of electronics to stay in person, unless you fight for it like I am with my child.
And the other thing, I wish I could remember the name of the program because I don't use it too much, but it's increasingly being pitched to science and math and English, is a program which is said, oh, you can, this program is a literacy program of various articles that are pitched at different reading levels. And so if you could stick 3 different students who read the same article, but given it at different reading levels, it will give them a different article. Like it will
Achieve
have more.
3,000?
Say again?
Did it achieve 3,000?
It's not that. I wish I could remember, but those are the tools that are now going more towards
Nonfiction, a lot of nonfiction too. I would
yeah,
say.
and it can be, yeah, and it's not, a lot of it is nonfiction, yeah, and it can be individualized, right? But a lot of it is being done, well, all of it's being done online.
Do you have an impression, because my sense is in the state of California that there are, especially in the younger, like many English as a second language learners in those early grades who are coming in where English is not their primary language. Any insights on how that factors in? I know that's, again, by the time they get to high school, they're probably more up to speed, but.
Eduardo, you want to say something about that?
Well, if you can maybe be more specific, Alison, with your question.
Well, I guess I'm trying to look at if they are screening children as young as kindergarten within the first 90 days of being enrolled in school. If English is not a child's first language, it's hard for me to imagine what an accurate literacy predictive profiler with AI, how that accommodates students where English is not already their primary language. Because I think there's a presumption that even at kindergarten, the children are coming in knowing all of their alphabet. And, you know, at least when I was, you know, still active and a parent, that the expectations of what kindergartners were capable of seemed far beyond what it used to be.
I apologize. I'm not sure if there's any current new assessment or evaluation that is being done currently. But I do know that every kinder child is assessed. They have to be in order to know where they are, what they've learned. And especially now that we're going back in person, they're definitely going to be assessing how much they know since the time they've not been in school. But I'm to your specific question, I'm sorry, Alison, maybe I'm not.
And I can tell you that I know for a fact that every student who comes into San Francisco Unified who is identified as a potentially English language learner, English as second language learner, does have to take a literacy test. They also do a test where a person has to hear them talk, but there is an online test that is like, that kind of pushes them to the point of failure around when do they understand something. And on that basis, they generate a kind of I think it's an SSRI score that they use to evaluate their level of literacy and to channel them into particular literacy classes.
And do you have a sense of the students, how they use, I mean, do they like reading on screens? I mean, do you get feedback from students? Are they acclimatized to that at this point, or is it exhausting? I don't know, that's sort of anecdotal, but.
I think teachers would say that they're transitioning, they like it, and they're used to it. But then I would also point to the number of black boxes and absences that students are not showing up. So teachers may say one thing, but if students are not showing up to class and they're also signing off early, they're quite exhausted after some time, especially the younger ones.
And certainly with the most at-risk students, and this is not just for ESL, but this is for general education, you will see these students where their literacy levels, we know those literacy levels can't be that low. So they just did the test to get it done with it.
Right.
So they like, I don't care about this test. I'm just going to give whatever. I want to be done and do something else.
All right. Well, let me. So this is, I'm clicking through. This is an image that I did, a map of sort of this bill. I don't know if this shows. Does it show my cursor on here, Jason? I'm not sure if it appears. This is the bill itself, and sort of this section up here. It's actually, as I mentioned, the Oakland NAACP is playing an active role in advancing support and providing key testimony in support of this bill. They're also connected with pivot learning, which sort of goes back to early stage, some privatization efforts, as well as something called 1 Billion, which is a global literacy app program that is linked to the United Kingdom. And then separate from this, there's actually, I'm going to go into some detail, a white paper, and this is the cost offset that I was looking for the Pay for Success, that was done by Boston Consulting Group and the University of California at San Francisco. They have a dyslexia center that is funded by the Schwab Foundation. And it's in this paper, they specifically reference a product called AppRise, APP capital RISE. And AppRise is connected with something called curious learning. So this idea that you're screening, doing a dyslexia screening, that then you identify strengths or weaknesses in a child's literacy, and then you sort of feed them over into these educational technology programs that will further sort of engineer their literacy goals, essentially. So this curious learning is actually connected deeply to you guys are on the West Coast. This is connected to Tufts, which is in Greater Boston, and MIT, and it's connected into a lot of sort of high-level brain engineering programs, both through UCSF and their neuroscience work. They have very robust neuroscience labs, and then sort of the Boston medical, cognitive neuroscience, military, venture capital crowd. So it's quite a robust map, as you'll see. And I'll just make a quick statement here. For people who've been following my work for a while, I put about 4 years worth of data entry into this online crowdsourcing program called Little Sis. Increasingly, I have been shut out of that program. They've now at this point, they deleted all my maps in December, and then they restored them, and then they deleted them all again. And so at this point, I'm sort of reduced to like going in the middle of the night and trying to skirt around and make maps and save them on the Wayback Machine to be able to access the data that I've had. But it's very clear, specifically, they were targeting these maps around dyslexia, around the dyslexia program, and selectively removing. They have deleted the UCSF Dyslexia Center 3 times out of their database. They have actively deleted it. And so they are making their own narrative framework of what's appropriate to interrogate as far as, imperial systems. For me, as I'm understanding what's happening in the educational technology space, it's very much, I consider it a biocapitalist project. But it's also disturbing to, these are simply relationships. There's no falseness in this relationship. It's just the story that can be told, and those stories are being suppressed. So that's sort of the overall bigger picture. And then, so this is sort of what I think is really going on beyond dyslexia, is that we're looking at putting very young children under circumstances that the data surveillance is being expanded. And I think people who are increasingly using online systems understand that it's not simply about the immediate data, but also a lot of the metadata that is attached to it. The Pay for Success finance, I've mentioned a number of times, it's a deficit model. Children will come into school and there is a profit motive behind identifying them as a problem or a potential problem, not simply to identify them as someone offering exciting possibilities for the class. You want to identify them as a problem so that you can sell a solution. That these dyslexia screenings are going to be linked to social impact markets, not only in early literacy, but increasingly based on who's involved in this Boston Consulting Group white paper. I believe that behavioral health and social emotional learning data is going to be combined in that as well. And we know that there are equations for performance metrics in both of those areas. As we're moving, it's again making markets to sell more technology, more cloud computing. And then specifically, if you look into the larger program, how they imagine education, this reimagining under the 4th Industrial Revolution, it's increasingly dehumanized. And even to the point that they're saying, and I have a slide later, but that an online program, educational program, has a certain cost. But if you can develop a simulation, like a virtual reality simulation, you save even more money. So it's primarily about maximizing data extraction and minimizing human interaction in this. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 different programs that are linked to the dyslexia screening. One is this app Rise, a prize, which is part of Curious Learning, Optolexia, which is a Swedish program that's looking to make inroads into the US and UK market, and then Lexia Rapid, which integrates with the MAP growth assessments, and that is being piloted in Oakland in this community lighthouse school. So I don't know, do you guys have any thoughts on that, or
I think the one thing, I just to make sure I understand the connection, well, you're going to talk maybe more about it, but they estimate that like roughly 15% of the population has some version of a form of dyslexia. But I think what you're saying is they're going to screen everyone and put everyone on this thing in order, the idea is to identify that 15% early on. And so that's the question you're kind of raising, is like, is that really what's in play here? Because are you really going to say everyone has to do 3 years of this program in order to pan out 15% of a population? Is that roughly what you're kind of getting at?
Well, what I'm saying is, as opposed to, it's not a diagnostic tool, right? So these kindergartners who are coming in and they're 3 months into school, and maybe some of them English isn't their first language, and maybe given what happened last year, maybe they've hardly even had an in-person human experience in a classroom. Is it appropriate to start pushing them into digital screening tools at that point, right? I mean, is the natural progression for reading, because there is a window in which children acquire, and some acquire it quicker than others. And so is it a better option to provide literacy-rich environments for kids and the supports they need, and then within a reasonable amount of time, and I'm not saying wait till a child is in middle school or wait till a child is in, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, but probably by, later 1st or 2nd grade, you're going to be, a good teacher is going to be able to identify the kids who need to be screened and to see if they have a diagnosis, because then that comes with a lot of complexity, right? Both obligations on the part of the school district to meet those needs, or often not meet those needs, and for the parents, and an identification of that child. So it's kind of playing fast and loose with the rules. If what you're saying is you're going to screen children just according to risk, that it's almost like you've created an algorithm of risk, that then you can play this risk into creating impact profits of fixing children that may never have actually ended up having an official diagnosis. And in fact, it disincentivizes giving a diagnosis to a child that may need it. And knowing that all of these school districts are really underfunded, is that the best use of the dollars, is to pad and line the pockets of these educational technology companies and screening children who absolutely don't need to be screened, and maybe actually feel like a failure? Sometimes these kids are put on things that make them feel bad, feel dumb, and then reinforce that they're not good readers, as opposed to giving them a window of time in which to develop their skills, skills relationally with each other in the world, and give them books and things before foisting them into these app programs. Because I think it's not simply the risk screening, but what happens next. Because if there's 15 to 20% of people who have an issue, well, they're going to probably pull 40% of the people in, right? And then they're going to decide who is actually risky. It's a game. Yeah, Eduardo, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a question. How are these risk screening, the risk screening performed, differentiated from how a diagnostic test evaluation be performed? Would you know? How is the screen performed?
Well, the legislation leaves it kind of open.
Oh.
So, it actually, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. It's interesting. It talks about like culturally relevant screening, but then later I'm looking at, and they have virtual reality literacy screening that are culturally relevant. So they're padding it with the language that makes it attractive to people, like knowing that they have these ulterior motives. So I think, ultimately it's going to be who has the insider's track. And I would say that the Lexia rapid screening, my understanding is it's not actually designed as a dyslexia screening, and it's not actually a diagnostic. It's a literacy screening. And so that's why I'm going to talk about that. It's actually not about dyslexia at all, but simply about putting children on literacy remediation programs. because if they wanted to actually screen for dyslexia, they would identify the kids that needed that screening and give them prompt responsive screenings, and then work with those families that needed it, not screen everybody.
As opposed, right, you're saying that instead of using all of the resources needed to be able to really support a child who may be struggling literacy,
Right.
that
I mean, rather than
maybe
your
holistic
budget,
approaches.
right, to screen every kids who don't need it and possibly
Right.
even, like, create a negative feedback loop. Use that money to buy books. Use that money to
Right.
hire a literacy coach. Use that money some other way that it doesn't pull it out of the district and put it in the pocket of, you know, in this case, like this 1 billion, like a you know, funds that are not even based in your community, that might not even be based in your country.
So we're already starting with risks as an assumption that every
Yes.
child is instead of okay, yeah, all right.
So this is the paper that I found shortly after. I'm like, okay, there's got to be a cost offset. This white paper conveniently was finished in July of 2020. You know, just in time. And it was done by the Boston Consulting Group. And like, honestly, guys, like when the Boston Consulting Group, I mean, they're the ones who closed our schools in Philadelphia, 23 of them. These are not good actors. And they were with the UCSF Dyslexia Center, which little cis people have deleted 3 times and don't want in the system, right? So there's something up with this white paper, and it's about the economic impact. So again, when we understand pay for success finance, that their return on investment is based on a false predictive profiling into risk, and then a fake out fix that looks like something on a dashboard. You know, in many respects, one of these big cost offsets has been the prison industrial complex. But look, now dyslexia, we're talking $1 trillion. I mean, they go big or go home, right? Like, they're like, oh my gosh, it's $20 billion a year, but in 60 years, it's $1 trillion. And if they can blow up this number in some huge, and it's all fake, I mean, they all just assign this number, they can start backing out the cost offset in this. So they're talking about 2 things: early screening and teacher training. Now, what they're going to look for in these literacy programs is data dashboard proof of literacy competency. When they talk about training the teachers for, you know, to provide impact, where they say teacher, they really mean gamified education system, because you guys aren't going to be around very long. Like, it's the same as when they were talking about value added modeling, the VAM, the pay for performance. That was always going to be for the computer programs. When teachers would come up and say, you can't pay me for performance, I do a good job no matter what, because that is my profession, that is my calling. I do a good job. I'm not going to do a less good job because I don't have a pay for performance engagement. I always come in and I do a good job. It wasn't ever about people. It was about the computer programs and delivering data analytics. And so when they say that they're going to do early screening, and then they say they're going to do teacher training, they may do teacher training and they may make you jump through a whole bunch of hoops. But in the end, the instruction, the evidence-based instruction, is going to come from a software platform.
And the thing I would add is there was a third category they talked about, which was the early screening, the teacher training, and the assistive technology. Those were the major, that's the other area, major thing. I do think there'll be teacher training, but increasingly they're asking us to put information in Google Classroom and online, and they're going to see how our data is going to be collected, how we do our job, what works, what doesn't, and that is what's going to be, that's how our data is going to be used to make a better machine teacher.
Yeah, I know. How do you look as an avatar? So it was one of the things that was really upsetting to me about reading the Boston Consulting, you know, the report, was all of the cost offsets. Okay, so they're making money when they can say, you know, because clearly I am not disputing the fact that it causes a lot of problems if children have undiagnosed learning, you know, learning differences, if they don't have the supports, if they don't get the tools they need. I am not in any way trying to diminish that impact. But it's quite galling when, you know, what they're saying is the offsets are prison, unemployment, mental health, homelessness, access to higher education. And then additionally, on top of that, they are building in the cost offset, the cost to families to provide additional supports and to actually litigate against the districts for not doing what they're supposed to do around IEP compliance or providing IEPs for kids that deserve them. And I know that is the case in Philadelphia. And the gall that they would actually, the litigation that districts use to come to fight parents when they're trying, those who have the resources to get their kids what they need as the cost offset for pay for success finance is just incredible to me. So again, it's a matter of framing. And if you're talking about predictive profiling, essentially what you're saying when you screen someone as being at risk of dyslexia when they're a first grader is you're sort of putting a subliminal code on them that future prisoner, future, unhoused person, that lays under it. And I have to believe that even in our relations with one another, there's this like, oh, here's your score on this digital screening tool. And it comes with all of this layered stuff behind you that isn't true, it isn't real, but suddenly it becomes attached onto yourself. And I think one of the things I want to talk about, because I've been a bit challenging in this like space around blockchain lately, but I do believe that there will be a blockchain identity tied to the education space, whether it comes in as part of these medical access systems, the medical identity systems, that then the education data becomes layered onto that there will be a code put into your digital identity whenever you receive one of these interventions, whenever you receive, it'll track all of your online platforms. And so at some point, if you're 27 and you end up getting picked up by the police and brought in, there will be some code pulled to say, oh, well, this kid got, this social emotional training and this behaviorist and whatever. And then it will somehow factor in and rejigger, the token points of the impact investors. And that is where the digital identity and the blockchain stuff comes, is that you're never going to get out from under this risk score that may have been laid on you when you were 5 years old. You guys have any thoughts on the cost offset stuff?
I mean, even, or just to add to that, even currently, don't we already have, even they say you're not, before you're 18, there's no record of what you have, but there is a record. We just don't have, or maybe there aren't, like, some institutions don't have access to it. But I imagine that this will exasperate, everyone will have some history, everyone will have what the kind of interventions that were done on them when they were children be used against them in the future because of whatever behavioral issues, whatever they have. I think that's what you're saying, at least, no?
Yeah. I mean, and I think the model for some of this, the data interoperability, the Clever online platform, which was actually an early use of QR codes for children who were pre-literate, really, the kindergartners who would hold up their QR code to the camera to access their myriad online learning programs so they could be fed into an interoperable database. Data Zone in San Jose, that's another one of these interoperable data systems. So, Clever was actually piloted through Rocket Ship Academy, which is a Bay Area charter school. So you guys are sort of a test bed for a lot of the idea of how can you most efficiently extract and then leverage data for these impact markets.
Yeah.
What's interesting is it seems like a free-for-all because they're making claims that they can really neither, you can't prove or disprove the claims that they're making about these future results,
Because it hasn't happened.
Right. But so
It's
they
a
could just say
model.
whatever they want. They could create models and say whatever they want because there's no way to really, you can't really disprove it, but they can't really prove it, but it seems like they could just go anywhere they want with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these are little children.
And the Boston Consulting Group white paper was explicit in saying that California was the best place to start this. The implication they were making was Silicon Valley and the tech area that we're in as seeing so central to it. And I would also say that this question of data, it comes up a lot in education, and it actually is very much connected to the discussions people have around anti-racism, is that the notion is that is somehow some sort of antidote to racism because it's getting away from humans and our inability to like see each other for who we are. So can we extract and can we look at things just in terms of data, and somehow that would be objective and therefore not racist, not divisive,
implicit bias.
Yeah, not biased. And so I do think there's a way that they're using these kinds of tools in the back of educators' heads to say this could help us produce a less biased world, and people are just being assessed on in a colorblind, gender blind, sexual orientation blind way, which isn't true, but that I believe is the hidden kind of myth underneath some of this stuff.
And the gaps, all of the language around closing gaps and the divide, the digital divide, not framing it as surveillance, really. So I just want to hit on this image. This is from Institute for Child Success, but just focusing on that special education and early intervention is central to the Pay for Success element. And I would say before this was really clearly on my radar, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I know that there were several high profile cases, I believe, both in Oregon and in Texas around special education, sort of like fraud or data sharing, education record access. And so I think that there were things going on in terms of pulling these baselines and getting data sets around special education and getting ready for what is coming that were happening years in advance of this. And so again, the dyslexia risk, not a diagnosis, but the risk profiling, the cost offset is avoidance of special education, both in dyslexia and in the early childhood space. So the other thing I wanted to mention in that report was Boston Consulting Group, and I mentioned University of California, San Francisco, which has a medical school, and they're clearly very connected both in the neuroscience space, so neurological engineering through gaming, which is this, I'll talk about it a little bit later, this Neuroscape lab, but that their medical school is also involved in Pay for Success finance. And Santa Clara County was one of the test beds for a lot of these early social impact bonds, one for mental health, housing, early literacy, and pre-K. And so they were actually working with Palantir, which is Peter Thiel's company, which is involved in predictive policing and homeland security. And so this idea that Palantir being involved in these deals of data analytics around unhoused people in communities where people may have family members who are undocumented is highly problematic. So when we're looking at the context of who is producing this document, we have to really interrogate a little bit more closely about the social justice aspect and whose interests are being served and the role that institutions, academic institutions, public health institutions are playing in carrying out these policies. Because the other thing is UCSF is also part of the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub. So they're very much embedded in that as well. So again, this is just, it was a digest of the legislation. Again, I just touched on it. Risk. Again, it's kindergarten, first and second grade. And they do highlight here in blue, like culturally, linguistically, and developmentally appropriate. So they do a nod to a sort of, an awareness of being fair in the apps that are being provided. But again, the question is, are students served? Would they be better served as an opt-in, right? That families who feel like their child needs support put in a request that is acted on promptly and that it returns information promptly and is actionable. To me, that seems like a much better response than comprehensively screening every child in a sort of a slapdash, quick way that just does the bare minimum, which is sort of what it sounds like what is coming. So I will say this is in the legislation itself, and it says specifically that it shall not be considered an evaluation to establish eligibility for special education. So to me, like that kind of blows up the whole premise to begin with, is if you're doing a law and you're saying, by the way, the risk screening we're doing will not be used to provide special education services if needed. Who's being served by this process? Because I would say there are many people who have spoken on behalf of these, I'm hearing about the bills who are very emphatic and upset about children not being able to read. And children do need to be able to read. That is a very real and present consideration, but it doesn't sound like the law as structured is actually intended to provide those children with those supports. So as far as Boston Consulting Group, again, I just want to emphasize they're working in the social impact finance space. This is a report they were doing on impact linked finance. They also did in 2016 a program with the Australia Post Office on frictionless identity management. Right. So when I was talking about having codes put in your digital identity about how you've been managed through these various risk screening tools and interventions that are given, that's something that Boston Consulting Group would be very familiar with. And then this is out of their report about early screening, specifically talking about their brains being malleable. And the malleable brain is sort of straight out of what Jim Heckman of the Heckman equation, University of Chicago, that's what's being used to finance pre-K. And J.B. Pritzker, when they pitched to the California community foundations, they were like, we can't shift cognitive data, but we can change character, and their brains are malleable. So again, we should use profound caution, I think, with children's minds, with that understanding, especially given the, to me, it feels like depredation of a lot of these digital technologies that are really designed to change their biological function, it specifically change the neurology in the brains, the neural connections in the brains of the children who are using these gamified platforms. And here it specifically references AppRise as the screening tool, funded not only by the state. So this is, again, the public-private partnership. This is sort of our techno-fascism arising, the state and private donors. And that the tool is a suite of tablet-based games. Okay, so this is a suite of games to shape children's malleable brains when these are 5 to 7 year olds. I don't know. I'll take a pause. Do you guys have any thoughts?
Well,
I have a question. Do you have a sense, or do you know if this is happening in any other nation, any other country, to different degrees?
Well, in 2018, I talked about Ready Nation. Robert Duger was a partner in the Human Capital Bond program with Jim Heckman, and he gathered people in New York City in the fall of 2018 for a global summit on pre-K finance. And a lot of this is framed around building brains. They specifically talk about brains as there's something to be engineered. And at this conference, and it was global, in fact, one of these early programs, the pilot with UNICEF, was in Boa Vista, Brazil. And this was, again, being targeted at families that were getting a subsidy because they were low income. It's called the Bolsa Familia. And so the mayor of that town came to that summit in New York. And when the registration happened, they said, and it was backed by Pew Charitable Trusts, grow up great. But it said, you can't even register for this if you're in the US unless you come with 4 vetted business people. If you're just an advocate for kids, we don't actually want you in the room. And so my sense is that a lot of this is being linked to humanitarian aid. And there's a lot being targeted at Africa and India as well as Latin America. And China, actually. Heckman is doing a lot of work in China. So it's global, because if for folks who listen to me, and it's crazy that we, over the past year, I've gotten to this space, but these fourth industrial revolution people really anticipate a post-human world. They're moving us from carbon to silicon. They're moving us from human beings in the world with other human beings and other living beings to cartoon characters in a screen or in some nanotechnology consciousness. And these children, the 3, 4, 5-year-olds, that's the biggest target, because those are the ones they want to pull into this silicon-based world. And so, and I think it's going to happen all around.
Okay. The other thing I would say, is first, it's hard to remember this as an educator because we spent the entire year in front of a screen. But last year, when I was in person, most teachers knew that one of our biggest difficulties with getting student engagement with each other or student engagement in the classroom was screens, phones, this other thing over here. And so increasingly to be putting these technologies as the medium by which students have to interact with some sort of a assessment area or some sort of educate to codify that at a very young age seems like completely counter to what our own experience in the classroom has been. That's the first thing. And the second thing is I looked at some of the AppRise programs, and you had little animals on an assembly line moving, and you had to code quickly how fast could you get the right code for the right animal here. And I really have thought about some of the stuff you had described in terms of remote work and remote assembly line work. And honestly, some of the things they were asking people to do in terms of pattern recognition, you're kind of in an early way trying to see who are the people who would be excellent at that and who would be people who might have problems with that. You could say you're going to try to help them, but the last thing I could think is I also think about what's happened for our ESL students this year. Like they have had such a difficult time interacting with this screen and interacting with a tablet. They weren't raised with it. It wasn't part of how they came to the country, and to be put in front of a screen and said, touch this part and do that part, that is a major barrier toward the technology infrastructure itself is a cultural element that is going to be hard for some students and hard for some people, depending on your background. And I just see a lot of problems with going at it this way. I don't think the Boston Consulting Group is concerned by making those problems, but if you were in education, I don't think you would want to go this direction.
I have another question for this so when do you think some of programs like these, Alison, would be begin being used in our possible California schools? Well, it's already some, like in San Jose, you were saying, but I'm thinking San Francisco specifically.
I mean, to be honest, I think in some ways it will just be like another assessment, right? It'll just be like, you guys have so many. It'll just like, if I didn't show up and go like, let me tease this apart and actually like look at what it is, it would just be like one of a laundry list of things that you have to do, right? Like it was like a death by 1,000 cuts. So, I mean, they were already talking about budgeting it into the, Newsom putting it into the budget. I don't, clearly that's not every, K through second grader in the state at this point.
I guess it's like the standardized testing where parents will have to sniff this out for themselves and be like, hold on, what? We're doing standardized testing, or we're doing some kind of, and then parents would have to opt out. They'd have to make sure they'd be aware to
you'd have to, they have to know, because it's only, I mean, would they even get a notification? And I would say, like, it's crazy with knowing that the goal of the impact markets is to create devastation and to break things down to ruin them. And then anything is going to be growth after that, right? So the past year has been breaking everything apart. So everything is totally terrible. So then almost anything you do is going to show some growth. I was speaking with someone who's running for school board in Salem, Oregon, and he said the kids are finally going to go back to school in person, but it's only going to be about 14 days of in-person learning to finish the year. And 4 of those days are supposed to be testing. And that the US Department of Education didn't give them the waiver, that they'd had a waiver to opt out of the testing. And the Department of Education said, nope. So like the kids get this tiny window of time, human time, and then like a third of it's going to be carved out for assessment because they need a wrecked baseline. They need the baseline to be wrecked so that they can make these impact markets. So again, Andy, I thought your comment about the remote work was really, really good. I mean, I hadn't quite thought of it like that, but looking at that image, and you can see I pointed an arrow in the background. Like, I think that's Gavin Newsom looking on at this. How is this? Imagine this kid is actually, doing some sort of work in a remote work environment, a cyber physical work environment. It's pretty gross. And I will say, so this is UCSF Dyslexia Center. It's talking about this app for preschoolers to kindergarten on this page, a suite of games. And the line underneath it says, currently screening for reading disorder risk is resource intensive offline. Nothing can be offline anymore. Nothing is allowed to be resource intensive. It's lean and it's fast and it's no nonsense and it's data driven, and that's what this is all about. This is from the legislation, taking the risks profiling, again, not diagnostics, but the risk is to provide instructional strategies. And I truly believe that the instructional strategies are going to be technology. Like the answer, this is simply about to drive kids into more technology, not to give them more paper books. So this is just a close-up of the map that I showed before, but this is the app Rise and the Curious Learning. Fumiko Hoft and Roland Hancock are sort of the 2-point people, research scientists at UCSF. Roland Hancock is now at University of Connecticut, where they have, I think there's like a brain scanning, like this brain scanning lab at the University of Connecticut. It's all about brain scanning now. And so there are these players that are involved in this. There's the World Bank, there's Tata Consulting out of India, there's UNICEF, and then UNICEF's Innovation Lab is actually at Singularity University, which is in the Bay Area. You've got Gabriele, so again, more brain work. And then we have Tufts, in addition to MIT, but Tufts is interesting. One of their premier alumni is Pierre Omidyar. So Pierre Omidyar of Omidyar Network is working on Good ID, Universal Digital ID, and educational technology. So when you start to peel this back, you'll realize it's not simply about we're screening the kids and then moving on and then sending them to the library or sending them to a literacy coach. We are screening many children for risk, profiling them into some sort of intervention, and then selling the intervention, which is then dispersed into all of these various, imperial, in my mind, biocapitalist feeder programs, that their data is actually, those children become batteries for this. And the app Rise, one of the funders is the Schwab Foundation, which is connected to many more conservative free market education, the Fordham Institute, Teach for America, Connect Ed, very ed-centric and they were the funders. So again, like the financial apparatus. I don't know if you guys have any.
I just think it's important to understand the trajectory of public education funding in the way it's been discussed. Is we've been talked about getting like maybe a reprieve for this year, 2021 to 2022, is to not get, the Governor Newsom is saying you're not going to take that hit this year. We're gonna, but everyone has been preparing for the coming years for the funding situation in public education to be more and more abject and more difficult. And also the particular group that I think is going to be that is right now most vulnerable in terms of the workforce are paraprofessionals, the ones who work alongside directly with students. So all those pieces that would have that element of being on a one-on-one contact with an adult, those are getting taken away, so that the remaining teachers are increasingly dealing with a larger and larger group of students. And then that is going to be taken away as we get trained to deal with large students, not in a classroom, but I think increasingly online. And then we're going to be training our robot replacement to do our jobs.
Yeah. And all of these people are benefiting, right? I mean, all of these interests, and that's what I'm trying. It's like a vampire, and to me, looking at educational technology as not only like a vampiric kind of process and a parasitic process, but these kids are batteries. These kids are batteries to run this apparatus, and to be trained to live in this global digital prison, which is sort of what it is. So this, to me, like, this breaks my heart. So this is Curious Learning. These are some of their partners. Again, you've got UNICEF, you've got the World Bank. I mean, that's about the human capital bonds. And, they talk about like help a child to read while out of school, not in school, out of school. So this is framed as a child, probably in the global South somewhere. And if you just look, they're in a natural setting, right? They're in, sitting on a mound, they're in a field, but where is their mind in this image? Where are they in that phone? They're not actually connected to the environment that their body is in. Their mind is somewhere else. And it is not even actually a laptop, or a Chromebook, as crappy as that is, or even a tablet. It's just a very small screen. And this ICT technology, the individual communication technology, is central to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 4. Like, the way they want to reimagine education is on a phone. It literally is this Pokemon Go version of gamified leveling up skill acquisition. I don't know. I'm curious. Do you guys have thoughts on this picture? Because to me, it just tells the story.
I mean, to me, like you said, Alison, it's sad because this is basically going against thousands of years of evolution, of us having to interact with nature and in communion and, with other people to be able to feel good. That's in part why I'm a communist, because I know that my health depends on that, being able to relate to people, to nature, to getting some sunlight. And yet here we are, advertising this as in the name of health, of kids' health, of, the future, basically. Again,
equity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but it's sad because, again, I think we are overlooking at some basics of nature, that in our reality, that in order to be healthy, we don't need all this tech. And, until recently we knew this, or a lot of people knew this and resisted, and they understood that putting a kid in front of a screen was bad. Putting a kid in front of his kid for too long was bad. But now it seems that, we've accepted this reality, and it's hard to even begin to question it in certain spaces. It's just not only just the technology itself, but the market solutions. When I hear all this, I think of the neoliberalism in Latin America. And something is broken, let it break, and then we'll bring a market solution to fix it.
Right.
And so, but except this is more targeted, more precise, individualized. And so, how do you fight that in isolation? Because that's what it's creating. Not only will this separate, kids from other kids, but I think there's also this danger of separating kids from their own families, from their own immediate community. And not just kids, but ourselves too. I mean, we know what these technologies do to ourselves, how addictive it is. I think we talk about, I was talking to my coworkers, we dared and hung out after a year. We went to Applebee's. Some of them have gotten the vaccine, so they've been cured from the paranoia. And so, but we hung out, and we had a lot of fun, and they knew we needed that.
Yeah.
And then one of my coworkers was talking about how he literally needs to leave his cell phone in another room to be able to watch a movie, because he's always being stimulated by the applications, whatever social media application. And so this is a 35-year-old person. What do you expect a kid is gonna, who's developing when they're in their 30s, how addicted, how dependent on this technology they're gonna be? And so we have to really think seriously about this, because it's not even just about us, it's about this next generation. It's about the future of humanity, literally. But just some thoughts.
Yeah, no, it's great.
And I think also
go ahead, sir.
I apologize. I just wanted to add that I think we're also forcing our elders. I know our children are most affected when they start early, but our elders and people who are also older, we're also forcing them to live into this world that is a changing world, but it's also one that's imposed onto people who don't want to live this life as well. I was just at the pharmacy, and someone, they wouldn't be able to get their medication because they didn't do the registration online and all this other stuff that they have to do, sign in, have an account, etc. And the older gentleman was very upset and was screaming and saying, I don't want to do these things online. I don't want to create accounts. I just want to sign somewhere, be at the pharmacy and come. And if I have to come a day early just to sign, I will do it. But you're not doing anything for me to be able to manage my life without technology. And the pharmacist just put on sort of just, I'm sorry, sir, this is the way we're doing it now. So I think it's in the imposition of all this is onto our children, onto our elders, onto groups, on like cultural people who are trying to hold on to values and traditions. So.
Yeah. Let's see. All right. So this is more on AppRise, but they talk about it being a gamified platform. And so it's, they talk about it being a suite of games and that it measures literacy more efficiently than conventional assessments. So again, it all becomes about efficiency, and it speaks to continuous measurement of learning. So it's efficient, it's continuous, it's about generating as much data as possible, and in a gamified platform. And it says the youngest learners of ages 3 to 8 play games designed to engage the same literacy skills measured in other assessments. So these are 3-year-olds. These are 3-year-olds that we're encouraging them to have continuous literacy measurement on a gamified behavioral app system. And that is what AppRise is. And again, it's also connecting, University of Connecticut, MIT, Learning Ally. There are several people who are connected with this. This is actually an entity that goes back to the late 1940s, which is audiobooks. Okay, so this is eventually, I'm going to get to this a little bit later on, but I believe that we're moving towards a post-literate phase, that they want people to actually, while they say they're going to screen for dyslexia, the goal is actually not literacy, to move to post-literacy. So that the fact that the audiobook people are in here, again, it's framed as an accommodation for kids, but I think their goal is that they want as much metadata as possible. And so if they either want you on a screen, or if you're not on a screen, that they want you logging what you've listened to and potentially what you're emotionally responding to in an audio format. So that is part of AppRise. I want to just talk a little bit here about Oakland. That Oakland is already doing a dyslexia pilot. And just, I think I've touched on this before, most of these things, but again, here's the bill. The Fulcrum program is central to this. They're connected to this 1 billion program, which is actually linked to the Education Technology Hub in the United Kingdom. So, you don't think necessarily that the Lighthouse Community School is connected to some larger global apparatus, but it is. And this feature just shows the Schwab Foundation, that it goes all the way back to this Educate 78, which is the early, I think it was even Hewlett Packard, maybe like a very early version of privatization, maybe back in the early 1990s, that was going on with the Annenberg Foundation. So again, aligned with the traditional understanding of privatization, but again, knowing that the AI is coming after all of us. So this is the 1 billion. Okay, they use something called OneTab. Okay, and so it's sort of a rugged tablet application. Again, this is in Oakland, is where they're putting this down, but it's part of a billion. Literally, they want 1 billion tablets. How green of them to put out 1 billion tablets into the world like that. What a gift for all of these children to be stuck in a tablet. This Education Technology Hub, as I said, is supported by UK AID and the World Bank. So, when you see World Bank, that's Human Capital Finance. It was funded as an X Prize, and that's Lorena Powell, Jobs, and Steve Jobs' wife. She does the X Prize. So again, it's scaling. And they have these now in Kenya, South Africa, Uganda, India, Ethiopia, Brazil, Cambodia, Malawi, and the UK. So when you're saying, is this happening other places? This is the extended literacy app, not necessarily the dyslexia risk profile, but these kinds of programs are directly synced. You have your risk profile, and then you're put on the OneTab program. Now, to me, this is a map that I had done quite a bit earlier, and I never got around to blogging, but I want to share it here, and I'm going to share the slide deck, and I encourage people to use the link and look at the original and really zoom in, is that this is the Negroponte brothers. Nicholas Negroponte, who was at the MIT Media Lab, and John Negroponte, who was involved in the State Department and US intelligence for years and years, and also later McGraw-Hill Education. And so if you wanted to imagine an imperial project of taking over your opponents, your geopolitical opponents, like you would embed your consciousness, your worldview, your content in an only consumable way, because these devices are not creative devices. They are simply consume, respond, demonstrate your compliance throughout the world. And so Nicholas Negroponte at MIT Media Lab, he developed an initiative called One Laptop Per Child, which is very similar to One Tab. It was like a rugged, one size fits all laptop program that ended up not going very far, but a lot of these things, you know, they do various trial programs. So when I saw One Tab, I'm like, that's the One Laptop program coming back. And we need to understand it as an imperial project. So this is, 2002. So we're going on 20 years out. The One Laptop has now been refined into this One Tab billion children hooked into a hive mind program. And again, it's important to note that John Negroponte, he was involved, in statecraft in the Vietnam War all the way forward, Honduras, Iraq, the Philippines. He was there, but then he was also embedded in McGraw-Hill. Okay. And I think most people, unless you sort of stumble into this, would never necessarily think of these devices as empire building tool in part of the empire building toolbox. But especially as we see that these online programs are about, at this point, tweaking people's neural pathways to certain ends to create certain brains for certain kinds of work. This is, I think, very important. I don't know. I'm curious if you guys, given the framing of your program, if that resonates with you at all.
I mean, I do think compliance is there, but I think the thing that's really chilling to me about some of the things you've said about the relationship between future education, current education as it parts in the future, and future work as remote work. The idea that you said before of the worker from Mexico who's mowing the lawn in California from a remote, controlled sort of thing. For those things that can't be just completely put into AI machine where you need a human manipulator, but not necessarily directly there. I also think it's about screening global competencies. Because I do think, and this is where, to me, the vaccines and China pushing their vaccine into other regions and the United States trying to compete with that. This is about who is going to have access, who's going to have its corporations have access to the greatest expanse of human capital from which to pull those techniques. Because I'm no longer a mission high school teacher right now. I teach in the Pacific Standard Time Zone. That's it,
Wow.
right? Because I teach at Zoom. And that is the situation. So if you're a capitalist, you are fighting over, you're not just trying to mold these minds, you want to see where the greatest skill sets are found anywhere in any time zone, and you want to use those and manipulate them. And sure, those people will get some kind of reward. They'll be exploited, but they'll see. But that's the world. That's the gig world that's being built. To me, it's like, so there is a race to see who can find out where these skills are around the globe, and who's going to be able to mine them and use them for themselves.
That's a really good point.
You've already talked about the new frontier, Allison. In John Classic, in the previous show we recorded too, we talked about how basically they run the imperial powers have run out of land. They're obviously trying to capitalize on space right now. This whole SpaceX is not about our future. It's about militarizing, profiting, and dominating the air. And now the new domain you mentioned before is the human mind in our biology. And so whoever has the most numbers of people under their belt, they're going to rule the future. And so this is what we talk on our show, of COVID not being about safety, the public safety. Is really about the supremacy of the future of capitalism, really. Who controls biotech, who controls artificial intelligence. And to do that, you have to data mine. And that's why it's chilling when you talk about this tablet, the 1 billion tablets around the world. I have seen these computers before and I thought it was novel, like years ago, but now it puts things into perspective and it's just chilling. It's, again, if you're not data mining, you're going to be a colony. if you're not, and if you're going to be colonized in that way. And the people that don't have a vaccine, for example, they're behind in the game of the supremacy for biotech. And so I think of, again, another level of colonialism for a lot of countries. And that's why it makes sense that Cuba is trying to develop their own thing, because, they know the game. They don't want to be part of, a colony. And so that's why you have these, quote unquote, socialist, communist countries also playing that game.
Oh, that's interesting. Interesting insights. Yeah, thanks, Kenny. Eduardo, are you good? Okay. So this is one of the pilots that's already underway. This is there's an article in Medium about this. Lighthouse steps up to screen students for dyslexia, partnering with NAACP Fulcrum to address Oakland's literacy crisis. And again, I'm not disputing the fact that there are issues with kids being able to read. I guess my question is the ultimate goal knowing the end game? Should we believe these technology companies that their goal is actually to get children to read and critically think, or is it to use them as an extractive resource in the process of identifying the desirable human capital or shaping the human capital to what the outcome that they want? And I think it's interesting because in this piece, they actually talk about that the AFT was working with them on a resolution. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that at all, but maybe that's worth, I don't know. I don't know what kind of conversations you have within the unions at this point, but like surfacing the layers of this dyslexia conversation, because again, this mandated screening here at the bottom, we can't wait for the mandate. They're just going ahead. And what they're going ahead with isn't that Uprise one that was in the Boston Consulting Group paper. They were using this Lexia Rapid, which my understanding is it's not actually designed as a dyslexia diagnostic tool. It's a literacy tool. It's a literacy screening tool. And it coordinates with the MAP growth assessments. And when you look at the MAP growth assessments, they're part of CASEL, which is that Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning. And it was really chilling to me because Jim Heckman, who's like sort of over here on the picture, he's the guy with the human capital equation, the Heckman equation. He had a whole social emotional learning gathering and, said some really reprehensible things. And one of his guests was with a company called Otis. And the gentleman from Otis was talking about social emotional data collection, and that he had been an administrator in a greater Chicago area school district. And he said something like to the group, this is on a recording, am I going to tell the parents that we're tracking their child's neuroticism? Nope. And they're tracking these ocean big 5 traits of the kids, and they're doing it in a way that is not out in the open. And some of that is being done through the various kind of testing protocols that are aligned with this CASEL effort, right? And it's all framed as we care about the whole child, we care about trauma, we care about this. Yeah, we'd really like to data mine you for our end game. So the MAP growth assessments in Lexia Rapid coordinate with this larger learning system that's connected to Lexia. They have a number of products. And Lexia itself, now this is very interesting, is part of Cambium Learning. So Cambium Learning Group, it's in their portfolio. So these subsets, right? So it's Lexia, it's Cambium. Well, in 2018, Cambium Learning got bought out by Veritas Capital. Well, that's very interesting because if you look up Veritas Capital, it pretty much only invests in defense contractors and intelligence interests. Like major holdings in Dynacorp, like this SI organization, Key Point Government Solutions, G Health, they're a defense contracting company. Okay, and they're like major players with the Council on Foreign Relations. And we were part of a transmutation revocation event that we did outside the Council on Foreign Relations on Easter Sunday, last Sunday. And Council on Foreign Relations incubated this thing called the Center for Universal Education, which is now spun over into Brookings. But it's all about training people for this future of cyber security, essentially, right? So if you imagine that this, Lighthouse Community School and well-meaning people, they want their kids to read, and the NAACP is like, we want the kids to read, and here, how do we do it? Well, let's do these tools. Okay, well, no one's looking a couple layers back into where the tool goes, right? Where the data goes. And if, Heckman is working with Robert Duger in Ready Nation, which is workforce development. And it's part of something here called Council for a Strong America. Well, Council for a Strong America has 5 divisions, and it's about training children to be ready and compliant to deal with law enforcement, to be workforce ready, to be physically fit and athletic, to be in alignment with evangelical Christianity, and to be in alignment with the military. Okay, so if you look up Council for a Strong America, those are the 5 things. And the one for the military, and it's kind of hidden behind here, I don't know if people will be able to see it, but it's called mission readiness. Okay, so you've got mission readiness here next to Veritas Capital and the cybersecurity state. And then you have these things that ostensibly are dyslexia screening tools that may be creating data that are like running pay for success markets. But really, like Andy, when you were saying it's screening human capital, or Kenny, you were also saying screening human capital to what end? Is it, this is a program of empire. This is a militaristic project. And what does that mean when you have, you know, a 5-year-old child, or, you know, maybe at this point it's a 7-year-old child who's been separated from most any social interaction for a year, and you throw them back into ostensibly a school environment that treats them like an efficiency data extraction point.
Well, I'm just reading the mission readiness. This is actually what they say right there on that slide. Retired admirals and generals strengthening national security by ensuring kids stay in school, stay fit, and stay out of trouble. That does not sound, that sounds like something from 36 in Germany.
Yep. That's where we're going, people. I mean, that's, and no one's looking a couple moves ahead. You know, that's what I'm saying. Like people, I think most people are coming from a good place, but they're not, there's no incentive to look at the dark side. You know, there really is no personal incentive or any professional incentive to look close at what actually is underlying all of this stuff. So, you know, that's Oakland. This is just a big map I did, pulling out some of the people at the end, because I'm always interested in who is in this space. You look to the acknowledgements, right? This is the Boston Consulting Group white paper. Well, who did they consult in doing this paper? And so this is a map, and, you know, I'll have the source material for people who want to, but there's a couple closer screenshots. So this is, again, the economic impact of dyslexia on California. One of the people who got totally scrubbed out of Little Sis that I had to put all the way back in was this guy, Ken Epstein. And Ken Epstein is like, I know, a psychologist, psychiatrist, let's see, former clinical professor of psychiatry at UCSF, okay? He did work for this Masonic Center for Youth and Families. So yeah, like the Freemasons. And when I dug into the California Freemasons, they're actually involved in education. And they have a really, really creepy annual report, which I would recommend. It's worth going to. But there's like the San Francisco Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, and then the General Masons of California, which go back to the gold rush. So there's some very interesting backstory history there that they like wanted scrubbed out of this conversation. He was at something called the Edgewood Center for Children and Families, which was like a residential or maybe a day patient behavioral health clinic. And he was a key figure in doing this work. I believe it was NSF funded, around trauma in conjunction with this East Bay Agency for Children. And so this, when you're hearing so much lately about trauma-informed practice in schools, I'm pretty sure it came out of this study, that this is this guy, among others, was developing this trauma-informed practice in Oakland. And he was involved, he was the lead on community behavioral health in San Francisco. And he was working with Nadine Burke-Harris on ACEs scores. You know, and she has her own youth wellness center that's getting funding from like Mark Zuckerberg. So, you know, people, again, I'm not here to say that adverse childhood experiences do not cause long-term health impacts. I believe that they do. But again, when they're scored and sorted and tracked, especially if they go into your digital identity that certain social welfare services may have access to, and knowing about problems with grooming children for abusive situations, having all this data compiled on kids, this nice tight dossier, it can be very troubling. And I'm curious what you guys think, because, you know, now of course, Oakland is coming out with this major universal basic income pilot, right? So we're imagining if the cost offset of dyslexia is prison, homelessness, mental health, in a variety of things, to me, it feels like that might start to get baked into not simply the operations of the child, but more a family structure, or there might end up being some programmable currency tied with his basic income that then feeds into these other mental health services that ripple back in and out of the educational environments, of which I think dyslexia is probably just a tiny node, but I think it is part of a larger web that it deserves some scrutiny. I don't know.
I'll just say, as a person who lives in Oakland, I haven't heard anything about this Oakland Universal Basic Income thing. So
it was in the Guardian. Maybe you have to be in the right group, you know? So, okay. So this is Ken Epstein, probably already erased out of Little Sis again, but I captured him. So this person, Fumiko Hoft, is with the Dyslexia Center. You can see here, she's talking about the importance of social emotional competencies for dyslexia, right? And so they're capitalizing on the fact that children who are having difficulties, learning to read, get frustrated, right? Maybe they're embarrassed, maybe they're mad, maybe they have anger. All of that analytics about their behavior, that's also going to be captured for an impact market. And here you can see that the Dyslexia Center is framed as precision learning, precise, fast data analytics. There's nothing particularly humane about this, and I've talked about my own personal experience. I mean, fortunately, I enjoy reading, and it came to me pretty easily. But my environment in elementary school, like when I was in 3rd grade, I had a teacher, Mrs. Nevius, and Ms. Nevius worked with us to build a cardboard geodesic dome in our classroom and decorate it with carpet squares. And we got to go in that little cubby space and read books. And we had class novels and read alouds, and we did creative projects. And that was my 3rd grade, right? I was not getting precision learning. I was getting like downtime with the K in a geodesic dome and writing off some little wide paper, tablet paper essays about things. That was my experience. And that's why I'm able to do this work, is because that was my experience. And these kids are being deprived of that. Do you guys have any thoughts about the focus on the social emotional stuff lately?
Yeah, I was.
Oh, go ahead.
No, Kenny, go.
You go.
I mean, when you mentioned your experience, Alison, I do feel that education is trying to do more of this precision learning, more they're focusing in, when a more holistic approach, a more developmental approach would be doing projects as the one that you described, to be able to create the foundations for literacy. I mean, if you're in a 3-dimensional experience, you're able to then understand the physical world, the material world, to be able to build that into your head when you read stories, and when you read when you're being read aloud, and you're connecting what you're being read to the real world. And I think those things are not encouraged in school anymore, and more of lots of testing, lots of now I can see that there's going to be a lot of computerized reading and a lot of screening in order to be, it's very linear, it seems like to me, and it's also not taking into account the whole child. I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned. And in this, we're going to label children if they don't fit, if they don't fit into this way of learning, and label them as all of these other in future
investment
levels.
Opportunity. Then they're investment. You can re-engineer them.
Yeah.
To me, it's important to think about the role of education in this system, in capitalism. That the goal of education is not to create well-rounded individuals that are able to, exist in community. It is, that paper, the Boston Investment Group and the UCSF paper, they straight up said, there is money on the table. We have to squeeze it from the capitalist trash, the people in prison, the people on the streets, the people that can read well, but guess what, those people that have dyslexia, we could still squeeze them. So this is about a more efficient squeeze to me. This is not about, well-being for humanity, for people, for individuals, for communities. It's just about extracting more, extracting as much as they can in a more precise way. So I do think, obviously we have to look at all this, but we also have to fundamentally ask, what is the role of education? And when we talk about that, we cannot separate that from the material reality. That people, what would education be in a society where you're not coerced every day by the threat of being houseless? You're not coerced every day by the threat of being hungry. So if you don't address those things, we can't answer what is the role of education. And they know this. They know this. The coercion is still going to be there. It's just more precise, more insidious. It's more, virtual. And so I think those are the important questions to ask. What is the role of education? And yes, we need to learn all this, but we will have to take control over that role of education that we want to create, to serve us, and away from the hands of all these vultures that, the technocrats and the, Wall Street types and the bankers and all that. So yeah, just, I think again, to me, we still have to look at capitalism. That's why I'm a Marxist, because I look at the whole thing, and you cannot separate what's happening from the profit incentive, from the market solutions, from the coercion we're all subjected to. Because like you're saying, Alison, it's hard for people to look at this when you're buried in trying to survive, But then we have to answer, why the hell are you, under so much pressure to survive? Why is your existence so miserable? Why is the US one of the most self-medicated countries in the world? Why do we then fall, and run into impulsive shopping, incurring debt into these applications? And so, what we have to answer, not only what is the role of education, but what the hell is the purpose of life?
It's hard to follow that. You're right. You're totally right. Because they want to make all of this, they want to make it about individual choices. They want to make it about you making a choice and being managed as an atomized thing, not as a cohesive collective.
So one of the things that's been interesting in this presentation, Alison, is when you showed that picture of the little kid on the phone, I didn't actually have a negative response at first. I looked at, I've already been walked down the road some, right? Because my brother basically wouldn't give his kids even a flip phone until they were 13 or 12 or something like that. He wasn't going to give them a tablet thing. And now we have, I don't know how old that kid was. That kid was maybe 5 or 6. And the parent is gone, and there it is, this the thing. And so we have a lot of work to do here to kind of see the symbols. Cause like, I'm looking at that, you notice the Precision Learning Center, and do you see that symbol next to it? Like in the screen? What is that? It's supposed to look like a tree, but what is it really?
I mean, I think it's supposed to be your brain.
It's your brain with electrodes mapped onto it. That's what it is. Because this is the UCSF brain lens. And now why is that important? I've been thinking about this, and it's very connected to the education and atomization. Because if you're going to educate people as isolated widgets, then you better know that brain. Then you better know what's going on there, because you're not going to have a person anymore. In fact, if you look at the Apparise presentation, the first thing they do is they give a caveat to say, please understand that all these educators you will see next to these children, they don't have masks because it was all done prior to COVID, da 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 da. But that's going away. You're not going to have somebody overseeing. So if you have to successfully educate people for your project, then they do have to know what your brain's doing when it learns, and that's what they have to start to manipulate you with. Because it's not going to be about a social experience or some sort of thing like that. You have to educate. The only way they're going to be able to successfully, and when I say success, I'm putting it in their terms at this point. is to actually get that brain understood and be able to figure out what do we have to do to that brain in order to get the proper outcome, or what measurements from that brain are telling us the wrong things happening versus the right things happening. So that tree is a future of isolated, atomized education of individuals, because it's a brain with electrodes, which we associate with rats and monkeys in labs.
Yeah. Well, and if you imagine too, beyond the pay for success, that the idea is to extract data to build that knowledge set of how the brains work. You'll want to pull a bunch of kids into the risk category. You'll want to calibrate that tool so that you get a nice fat group of kids to work on, so to advance your program, to advance your machine learning. It's not really so much about them. It's about building your data set.
I just want to throw in there that the logo also reminded me of a uterus.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, these days they're talking about like pods, right? Like all kinds of, I mean, who thought we'd be this, already have to talk about this stuff. But yeah, I can see that for sure. So this is the other piece of this, just saying that like they're looking to what you said, Andy, they're looking for different kinds of brains to do different sorts of things and to reinforce in neural feedback loops through AI to get kids, to turn them into the adults that will function in this cyber physical world that they're building. And they talk about if properly remediated, right? You go from being a problem to an asset. So now dyslexia is being framed of as an asset because it's entrepreneurial, right? So, that gives us a bit of a window. I mentioned in some of my previous talks that the Israeli Defense Forces, they had a whole intelligence unit where they were specifically cultivating children on the young adults on the spectrum for certain intelligence, because they had a focus, they had a mind that worked a certain way. And then now they're saying, well, this dyslexic mind, if we can identify that and enhance that, that we could capture the good parts of this and redirect them for our purposes. And of course, here you've got, Gavin Newsom and Charles Schwab and, Steven Spielberg being these models for what it should be. Now, I just want to touch base again. I think the mental health is going to be really important. Again, they probably more than your cognitive, your behavioral analytics are going to be more important in this world, because compliance is everything. Your knowledge is going to be delivered to you on an augmented reality tablet, but they want to know if you're going to obey that unquestionably. And that's why a military framing of education is, we're moving towards a military type of education. You don't ask questions, you just follow orders. And that's how things are going. So Portantino, who is backing the dyslexia bill, also has a number of other bills around mental health, which again, clearly this has been an incredibly stressful year for everyone, particularly young people and children. And so I don't have anything particularly against the nature of these bills, but I think we have to be very mindful that sometimes, especially if data is aggregated in educational settings, knowing that FERPA has been, the data protections have been rather shredded, that providing therapeutic services or diagnostics in education is a problem. And one of the most shocking things, and I've mentioned it in several of my talks, is that when I was looking through the LinkedIn profiles of Nancy Lublis, that she was a CEO of the Crisis Text Line, and then they data mined those very sensitive text-based transactions to create customer service call center software. And so I think when we're interfacing with these programs, especially around behavioral health and mental health, that can pivot into corporate enterprises, that we better be darn sure that we know what we're doing, that we're not ultimately creating environments that might cause further harm down the road. And I guess, you guys know about the FERPA, being gutted, that it's not the same as HIPAA. If these services were provided in a clinical setting, they would have better protection than they would if they were being in an educational setting. And I don't even know what that means now in Zoom land. I don't even know what that means in Zoom land, but assuming people ever get back to going to school again, it's relevant. So these are just a couple other pieces who were in this report. Alex Briscoe was the director of the Alameda County Health Agency, which is, I think, is a major health agency, and his focus is around Medicaid. So a lot of the Pay for Success public-private partnerships, that money is going to be drawn out of the public coffers, and some of it's going to come out of the education funding, but some of it's going to come out of the Medicaid and the Medicare funding. He is an advisor to many predatory philanthropists, the Casey Foundation, Robert Woods Johnson, Tipping Point, which is the Robin Hood Foundation of the West Coast. And then the Stewards of Change is the data analytics element that the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust and DataZone feed into that. And it connects to this National Interoperability Collaborative. And among those partners include the National Fusion Centers. And so when I was doing my early research around DataZone in San Jose and the Silicon Valley Regional Data Trust, I found it very shocking that it went from primarily education-related data to, when it went to the National Interoperability Collaborative, to mostly health data. It didn't make sense to me until this past year. And now we know that the health data analytics are the biosecurity state. That's the control mechanism, is the health data analytics. And so seeing the involvement of Stewards of Change with this gentleman here, doing the advisory with the philanthropy, but also the Medicaid and the weaponized public health system is very important. Why is this guy so closely involved in the dyslexia? You know, what is his role? Why is Boston Consulting Group speaking with Alex Briscoe about Medicaid? You know, that raises some questions here, especially with Ken Epstein. Why is he being acknowledged in this paper? Sorry, keep going. Charter schools, just, you know, we know charter schools. Ultimately, I will reinforce at this stage of the game, this AI quantum computing abomination is coming after everyone. But if we wanted to put on our old hat and pretend it was 5 or 6 years ago and that we were all against the charter schools, it's useful to know that Sue Shalvey, who is the wife of Don Shalvey, who is a former program officer of the Gates Foundation and founded Aspire Public Schools, is also deeply embedded in the Special Education for Aspire and the Charter School Association and Special Education Task Force. So the charter school people are in here.
Yeah, and Eduardo, what do you think about telling us a story about one of your allies and how it relates to this? Like, charter school is so last year.
In what do you mean, Andy?
Well, do you remember the person who, how comfortable do you feel sharing that story about the person who's like, you're talking about charter schools, what about your Google Classroom?
Well, there are teachers who criticize certain groups of parents who want to go back to in-person learning, and these groups, some of them have parents that have been involved in charter schools, but the very teachers that are criticizing these organized parents trying to fight for in-person learning are also don't look at the hypocrisy of their public and private partnership that they're doing with Google, right? So it's a little hypocritical to be criticizing families or organizations that are maybe tied with charter schools, but teachers are not looking at the public and private partnership that is happening between Google Classroom, UESF, or other unions and the school districts that are currently, like in New York as well. No?
Yeah. Well, I always said, like, the hybrid blended learning. Years ago, I wrote a piece and I equated it to the cicada killer. And I'm like, you know, the big wasp that grabs the cicada and paralyzes it and lays its eggs on the inside. And then, like, they eat their way out. You know, I sort of feel like we're at that phase of inside out, you know, the hybrid learning that we started off with is now manifested. But I agree at this point, if we understand what the true threat is, we need to start to actually look across to allies around, because no matter if you're homeschooling, Catholic school, private school, charter school, this stuff you're not going to get away from this version. The other interesting character in this picture is Bob Wise, who must be ancient, a former governor of West Virginia, which is a center for biometrics in the FBI. So a lot of, that's an interesting thing I did not know about West Virginia, but he was in on the ground floor with America's Promise and this Alliance for Excellent Education, which is all Edtech in Bloom. That probably rings some bells, the data analytics, this next generation learning, which is, Edtech and competency-based learning. So the fact that Bob Wise, who's this ancient guy who's been like in with the privatization tech for probably like 20 years is in the dyslexia paper that Boston Consulting Group is writing, that shows that this is not just a California thing, that this is a larger national, if not global enterprise that's being undertaken. Just to touch base, there are a couple other programs that are around. One is this Optolexia. It's a Swedish company, and they're looking to move into the United States and the UK. And it's interesting that that two key developers who are computational linguists are their backgrounds. They're out of this thing called the Karolinska Institute, and the Karolinska Institute is doing pay for success and health impact data analytics with this health management apps. So this is a partner with the Karolinska Institute. So that is useful background. It's an AI program that does eye tracking. So it's eye motion tracking. This is different than the video game kind, but they're actually literally tracking your eyes. And the US representative for the Optolexia, which is now called Lexplore, her name is Melissa Genskow Lazaro, and she's based out of San Diego. So there's probably a pretty good chance that Optolexia is going to show up in maybe Southern California pretty soon. But she actually had done work before with Tesla, and she had a background in special education work in Poway Unified School District, which is around the San Diego area. So I think that this is important to know, this company, and they talk about that the US is a large market with a growing awareness of the problem. So this, Kenny, you're very good about talking about the market solutions. This is the market solution. They have identified that there's this new market in the US and the UK, and they're stressing the importance of local partnerships, right, to launch these services. So if the question is where, Eduardo, where are these going to show up? Well, I guess it depends on where they have, their relationships, which companies have relationships with which districts to sell the screening tools. Now they're working with Microsoft Azure. So this AI with the eye tracking software, and it is unclear at this point if there's any biometrics. This is not with the headgear device. I'm assuming it must just track them through the camera. I don't know exactly how that works. I know it's not a headset, but they're tracking eye motion. That's how they're deciding who is at risk, is by tracking, not sitting with someone and looking at how they're navigating a page of text, but literally an AI tracking where your eye goes on a page. All of this data is stored in Microsoft Azure. So that we're back to, Gates, Ballmer, the cloud computing, is that they're mining the piezoelectric energy, the eye motion of children, to feed it into the cloud. Just touching base, the pathologization, we were talking about the brain lens. We touched on that global literacy will happen through neuroscience, which is just those crazy, that you're going to engineer their brains, that there's this whole area of big pharma that people are not aware of, that is digital therapeutics, video gaming, and Achille, which is the first ADHD software, prescription video games for children, came out of Neuroscape Labs. And Neuroscape is based out of UCSF, but they spun it out to Achille, which is a company in Boston. So that Joy Ito's venture capital company was invested in that. So they say it's time to play your medicine, right? And you can just imagine that pretty soon they're going to have dyslexia, to, play your dyslexia medicine game, right? And what happens if you're a parent in the school system and you're recommended to have your child play this prescription game and you decline? And what does that mean for those families, to put them at risk? There's a whole thing called the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, and they're pushing digital healthcare for health economics. So the health economics is the cost offset. Melina Unkefer, she's a pretty intense woman. I highly recommend you look her up. She is a professor of neurology, and she was with Neuroscape. She came to Philly and gave a talk here about learning engineering, really, and understanding that they're really talking about engineering neural pathways. and to what end? And can a 5, 6, 7-year-old child consent to have their neural pathways engineered by some academic institution backed by venture capital? You know, I think that's a very, very fair question. And again, these institutions are adding legitimacy because, again, you know, you have these professors of neurology, psychiatry, you know, doing this work. The Gabrielli brothers, you know, we talked about them before. Curious Learning, we've kind of gone over that. I will just emphasize that Christopher Gabrielli, again, he is connected with promise zones, opportunity zones. So I can very much see with this UBI being layered, that there would be these layers of risk, families being assigned behavioral pathways, remediation pathways, you know, and dyslexia being just one part of this larger constellation. And I don't think it's actually about diagnosing dyslexia, because if you look at this image, they're talking about it being a universal screener. So universal, the first thing they say is school readiness. And then they say dyslexia risk. School readiness is the cutoff for the pre-K pay for success impact bonds. They want to know if children are ready for school. That is one of the success metrics. And I think that this app Rise, they're using dyslexia and the concern around dyslexia, which is a very valid concern, to actually get this in place for pre-K impact investing. And that's what app Rise is really about. Here you'll see the Center for Childhood Data Systems. They're specifically talking about pay for success and school readiness. Same language, okay? This goes back to 2012. This is Robert Duger again, working with Heckman. So the school, I think that these dyslexia tools are really about readiness. One of the funders for AppRise was the San Mateo County Office of Education, which is interesting because they are actually had one of the early literacy social impact bonds called the Big Lift, which was backed by the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. Tons of crypto in there, a big money sloshing thing. It's the largest community foundation in the country. They want to get this stuff going for Goldman Sachs. And the woman, Hoft, who was connected with the prize, like she was part of a Decoding Dyslexia Summit with San Mateo County Office of Education. So I think, you know, that again reinforces these connections between the impact finance. It's a huge market, guys. We all know about these third grade test scores, right? The Chicago Literacy Social Impact Bond that was backed by Pritzker and Goldman Sachs, they're making bank. I mean, this is from 2016, that they've maximized their payment. And they have 3 thresholds: kindergarten readiness. So then we've got a prize, right? Are you kindergarten ready? You know, that was giving them a pretty small amount. Reductions in special ed. Well, what happens if you use a dyslexia app, a risk screening tool, and you screen a whole bunch of people potentially into special ed, and then you swoop in with your Edtech program, and then you save them from special ed, and then you create a $21 million bottom line on that all of that fiction. It's a total fiction. And then the third grade literacy. So there's just a lot of money riding on this, and I'm curious what you think. Does that seem to make sense to you? I'll just go back. School readiness.
I definitely, the financial stuff is still, I struggle with, to be honest, like to understand how these folks are going to make money. It's more about me not understanding how these markets work and finance markets, to be honest. But I definitely looked at those programs now that I saw as they would tell you something about school readiness if school was going to increasingly be online. That's true. You know, it would, because I saw some of the things that they were asking you to do with these pattern recognition things and the speed of operation things. I do think it would tell you who could be shunted more readily into an all online experience, who might need to be remediated to something where it's not quite there. That I could see.
That's interesting, Andy. Thank you. I appreciate that, because I don't have that experience to have that insight. That's really good. Okay, so I know it's getting a little late, but just again, the screening instrument is a brief tool. It's a brief tool. They're not putting a lot of effort into this with discrete skills to determine the risk and the need for interventions, okay? And then the other piece of this is that it's being fed into the multi-tier system of supports, which I think is connected to PBIS, which is sort of this behaviorist academic behavioral. Do you have any insights for me on what MTSS means in terms of data analytics or anything? Is that anything you deal with? Okay.
No, that's another acronym.
Okay, so I'm sort of winding down now, but just context. I do believe that we are moving to a post-literate world. I think that is the plan. I think independent thought, independent reading, it's just like if we imagine back, you know, enslavement, right? You don't want people to actually have autonomy of their own thoughts or, you know, collective, you know, learnings. And so they're framing this already. And again, I do not mean to dismiss the difficulty and the challenges of people who truly have a diagnosis of dyslexia. I'm in no way, please, I hope people understand, I'm not trying to minimize that. I'm trying to make sure that we appropriately use resources so those children get what they actually need to succeed. But this framing is that we talk, but writing is really hard. Children are wired for sound and print is optional, okay? And must be painstakingly bolted on. And this woman, Marianne Wolf, is connected with Tufts, who is part of this overall with Curious Learning. This is from a slide share that they were doing, pitching the dyslexia legislation. This is Learning Ally, where they're the audiobooks, right? And this image below is Nubian VR. That's the headset that's being advanced with money from the UNICEF Innovation Fund. And to me, you know, this is a very strong image. It's almost like, to me, it feels like an occultic type of symbolic image that is the next phase beyond the little child sitting on the mound of dirt with the phone. Like at this point, the phone is just covering their face. Like they are totally disconnected from this sort of radiant world that is around them. They've been captured, fully captured by it. The simulation enterprise, they are moving towards virtual reality, wearable technology, augmented reality. This is a very important slide share from JCA Solutions, which is a defense contractor in Orlando. It's a defense contracting program talking about data capture and virtual reality. And they're pitching the cost of e-learning courses versus simulations. And they're saying you can save a whole lot more money, even beyond moving to an e-learning class, to make it a total simulation. And Andy, when you say that it's about people, teachers putting in enough data to make themselves obsolete, I think you're right on the money about that. This is a really devastating image for me. It was talking about the UNICEF Innovation Fund has a number of virtual reality education programs that are rolling out in Africa and India and Chile. This is one, I believe it's in Nigeria. And they actually, they say that the problems with Nigerian education, the lack of access and overpopulation in schools. And it says, there will never be enough money allocated in the budget, qualified teachers, or places in schools for the population. Like literally, UNICEF is just saying, these kids aren't getting schools. We've just decided they're not worth it. We are not reallocating our resources to give these children actual schools and teachers. But you can use an emerging reality like virtual reality to just jump over and have affordable, scalable, better quality education by slapping a virtual reality headset on these children. And that you can create the VR content where you are. And so that is, again, being framed as, you know, liberation, right? We will train people, local people, to do these STEM works, and then they can design their own virtual reality, right? And then that will be an advance, that will be a technological advancement for them. And then framing it as open source, and then they can share it around. So, you know, I'm just curious for people who value human teaching, like, do you have a response for that? Like imagining that this is not just a one-off, that this is part of UNICEF, this is a Sustainable Development Goal 4. The future of education is that you're in a VR headset.
I think that this is all driven by economic interests, and we're really, if we're not paying attention to this, we will see the consequences of our future human experience being deteriorated if we allow our bodies, ourselves, our human experience, our minds, our soul, everything, if we allow this to be corrupted by this, there will be consequences in the future for how we are. What will happen to our psyche? What will happen to our bodies, our physical bodies, right? What will happen to our minds? And I can only see how screwed up our minds will be just being connected to this digital world and being prepared for it in this way. If we don't put the brakes on it or steer away from this, especially that they at such an early age that they're trying to do this to kids in the name of quality education access, guised as intervention and screening and risks and trying to find solutions and accelerate development and all of these key words and that are trying to gaslight educators into thinking that this is the way for us to go. And I'm a little bit, not a little bit, but I'm surprised that UNICEF is involved. That's another one that's coming to my mind about this.
Disney is their primary funder. The innovation fund, their primary funder is Disney. They want you to live in a Disney Pixar
And this
movie.
report that UNICEF did is speaking in relationship to where?
I believe that this is Nigeria. They're talking about the Nigerian education system.
And that's what's interesting to me, because literally you could lift those words, the problem of lack of access to quality education, overpopulation in schools, and then say there will never be enough money allocated in the budget, qualified teachers are placed in schools for the population we have. Therefore, we're going to use VR to get around this and give you an online digitized experience to supplement for the fact that we don't have real resources. That language could be used right here, right now. And that is going to be the language that's going to be what's going to happen to what was called public education, which I have a tough time calling public education right now. But at least for those of us who thought we were an education system that was about educating everyone, this is what's coming. It's not coming to Nigeria. I mean, it is going to Nigeria, but it's coming to us, and it will happen unless we stop it. Because that's the part that is most upsetting is that thing about compliance and the lack of willingness I see in many of my colleagues to look at that dark side and to really not want to see this, and in fact operate in a way to avoid seeing this. We will do that. I mean, this does not end well for us if this continues.
Okay. So I just want to point out that the UNICEF Innovation Fund operates out of Singularity University, which is a 37-minute drive from Oakland. Right. So they're talking about Nigeria, but it's the Bay Area, right? And so this is them. This is from 2014, so ancient history, right? UNICEF 2014, reactions after sessions in the Oculus Rift lab at Singularity University, right? So again, when we're talking about the one laptop, one child imperial project, there's a fair bit of MIT, but you guys have a lock on a lot of things too. This, I will just reinforce that the legislation was highlighted about a culturally appropriate testing scenario. Like they really want to make you believe that they care about, having a diverse population. But this is another one of UNICEF Innovation's investment programs. It's called Utopic Studio in Chile. This is the Chile one. And they talk about, so this is a very small child. This probably, you guys are probably a better judge than me, but like this looks like in our age range, maybe first grade in the VR head. All of them are in VR headsets. To me, it's just like an abomination. And they're framing this as a non-traditional, more a sociocultural approach to literacy, specifically literacy testing. Here you go. See the research on VR for building literacy skills. So when I'm imagining what they really mean, a post-literate consumption of digital media content that may actually engineer neural pathways in your brain. Compliments of UCSF and Singularity University and Disney is what is coming. I'm almost done, but just that learning ally being a piece of this with AppRise, the audiobooks, understanding that the metadata on the screen, the wearable tech, they'd rather have you listen to a TED talk and log it in a learning locker. This is all about this XAPI skill points. And then this XAPI is a military construct. It's about training military personnel, really. and reducing education to like a noun verb object statement. And they say, we can track it. Learning happens everywhere. I watched this video. I did this virtual reality simulation. Cha-ching, your token goes into your learning locker so the AI can appropriately sort you. The AI knows, what your behavioral compliance level is. And it is all within a panopticon. Education is only happening. There's no self-reflection. It's always outward facing. And this is an image called Learning is Earning, which is about blockchain education. And this is quite an old, I'm trying to remember, it's like 2016, I think, from Institute for the Future, which I think is Bay Area as well. And this gentleman here, and his accent is quite hysterical, as in this video, but he's a delivery driver. And he talks about like, hey, I'm not going to be a delivery driver all my life. I really care about my education. I listen to audiobooks. I have a group. We talk about these audiobooks and I get points in my learning locker, right? And that's what Learning Ally is. That's why Learning Ally is attached to this Apprise Dyslexia program. And not to say that children who need supports or accommodations should not have appropriate accommodations, but is there a market incentive? Is there an incentive from a social control position to make sure that whatever educational content people are consuming is trackable, and used by AI to predetermine how we interact, as opposed to having, there is no metadata on a paper book. Nobody in Silicon Valley is making money off of anyone reading A Wrinkle in Time in a hardback copy or used. You know what I mean? No data analytics people are making that money. So the world we're living in is the world that they want to track everything. And then how do we, as Kenny said, how do we create these alternative educational spaces, right? Like, what does marronage look like in an educational context? How do you do covert education? How do we maintain some semblance of people who, at this point, I'm somewhat imagining like most young people who've gone through teaching programs, they've all been taught that this is how you do it. And so they're erasing that knowledge layer. I mean, like Andy, your cohort may be some of the last people who have that intense knowledge of what it is like to teach, not primarily offline, when not outside the panopticon. And then how do we maintain that? So I think this is actually my last slide, but just in summation, that the compulsory screening. Now, I'm not saying, I want to emphasize, I'm not an educator, but I would hazard a guess that there's not a lot of benefit in screening a kindergarten child. Let the kids get their sea legs under them and actually develop and get a little confidence in how they do things. Support them. Use the money to provide humane education, smaller class sizes, books, and supports. To force it on everyone is probably not the best use of money for the district and for the children, and ultimately is about assigning levels of pre-criminality. The risk profiling is pre-criminality on these children. That it's about the data to grow the impact markets, that children are framed as problems, that the solutions to the problems are always technological because that's what is needed for the data, and that the idea is to pathologize them, but not to pathologize them into actually getting what they need, but to pathologize them and then start to restrict and put limits on actually getting the IP. Because if they get the IEPs, then the return on the investment aren't going to show up. And the IEPs are the cost offsets. So yeah, so those are all of my slides, but I know it's a lot. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I'm more than happy just to open it up to general impressions.
Yeah. I could say, can you all hear me? Yeah. Well, this is, how do I articulate this? This goes along with a lot of the conversations I'm having with educators around not rushing to think that kids are deficient or they are to be fixed, as you had put in one of your slides. I use the words like to think that they have problems to start with. They don't have any, like they already have issues. It's to try to we have a tendency in public education to immediately label kids everyone's labeled, everyone has some issue, and then to get them all these resources, but we don't really have the education. Our education is not set up to really cater to all of the different ways that we learn. And so I'm afraid that by labeling children, we are then also doing what we're doing. We're giving a rise to sort of programs such as the ones that you've outlined to in the guise of in the name of intervention, to then seek out ways to exploit kids with differences in learning, or to try to then use them as ways to advance causes such as digital learning, or any sort of way of the future of a no-touch world in which people are just working robotically and in virtual spaces, and not possibly, and moving us away from nature, moving us away from traditions, moving us away from human interaction. And I'm just afraid that we are we're just not like slowly doing this without realizing, because I don't think teachers don't want this, but then they're not doing anything about it. I think this has come about very slow, like a Trojan horse. Like you just sort of have accepted it over time. Had this been something that is, had we talked about tablets or any sort of digital learning in, let's say, in the 70s or the 80s, it would have been what's going on. But this has been evolving over time. We've been allowing technology to be incorporated and integrated in education, and slowly people have accepted, and because of digital divide, because people don't have technology at home, that there's a need for it, and we need to everyone needs to be online. Everyone needs to have Wi-Fi. We even need to have the global South have Facebook fly over, what do they call it? These planes of like Wi-Fi, or everyone needs to be connected. So I just thinking, how will I be able to communicate this with my former colleagues or people who are in education, or even families? Maybe families will be the key to this, because I just don't see how teachers are going to, I don't know what you think, Andy. I just don't think teachers are going to buy into this. They're not going to think this is an issue. I've been trying to bring up some of the stuff on Fourth Industrial Revolution, and unfortunately teachers just think, oh, that's not going to happen. You're thinking too dystopian here. Yeah, that's too far off. But I'm very impressed and by all of this. And I'm also very appreciative, Alison, that every person that you name, every company that you put on the screen has a background, has some connection. They didn't just get there as if they worked up to this. No, they've had some connection to it. Even that woman and the people from DDD or DD, which is the Dyslexia Decoding Group, the Decoding Dyslexia Group, you put where that they've worked before, where they've connected to, and I'm appreciative of all the maps to be able to, and I would like to know where I can find that. That's on your blog, right?
Yeah, I'll have them in the slides, and then I have a source link because I've had to save them on the Wayback Machine. But yeah, I'll put the slide, we can pin it in the post.
Because that will be very useful, because we forget, if we have a textbook, for example, McGraw-Hill has a connection to who, and they have connections to who. It's all interconnected. This is such a web, it's hard. And people just think, oh, we need a textbook. But this textbook is done by people who have an agenda, whose organization, whose institutes are connected to a larger web of people that have political agendas for all of us, for the future. And it's interesting too, you pointed out Pixar, and I'd like to know more about Pixar and their intentions, and or at least what their story is, because I think that kids are very drawn to characters, they're drawn, but I was having a conversation with my brother that I'm very weary of any sort of motive that it's like a hook to get people to focus, or to have children only be marveled by certain entertainment that have also connections to earn funding to, for the digitalization of our world.
Thank you, Eduardo. That's great. Yeah, people should look up the UNICEF Innovation Fund. I believe it's also the foreign ministries of like Denmark and Finland. to the Scandinavian countries. It's very unusual, but I think there's a lot of refugees. So I think this often goes through the aid system.
Yeah, Jason, I want to first thank you for letting us have the space to do this. I am kind of curious if you have thoughts about things. What are some of the things you're drawing out of this that you've heard? Because I am curious. I want to share something, but I'd like to hear also Jason, of course, Kenny too.
Yeah, well, the one thing that comes to my mind is and it's just constantly on my mind is just like some of you were saying, like, how do we get people to actually see what's happening? Because there's definitely like a block there. I was communicating with a friend of mine online who is a teacher, and I was getting her to watch some of Allison's talks, and then she came back with, the typical, this is fatalistic, this is conspiracy, and it's just like there's of course there's people that want to make money off of this, but that's always existed, and not really understanding just how much this changes things. Like this is a very, it's a new phase, and so the one thing I think about too is if we move forward is just like, and I do this, just repeating myself over and over again, and it's like, okay, clearly this, what I'm doing is not being effective, and trying to figure out some ways to, try something new in order to like get people to understand like what's happening. And I, a lot of this came natural to me because I've spent my whole life kind of looking at power and looking at these economic systems and how predatory and how bad they are. So it was like, once I came across Allison's work, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, I mean, she put a bunch of pieces together for me, but it wasn't like I wasn't having to change my entire, foundational worldview around it. I already kind of understood a lot of that stuff, but yeah, that's kind of some of the stuff I was thinking about as I was listening.
Yeah, and I wish I had an answer for how to reach teachers or educators right now. I don't know how to do it. Eduardo and I often discuss what's the best approach. And I would say our approaches
we have
are,
two different approaches.
we can
He
scratch
drops
off
it.
the
He
list.
just drops it and does uncooked, unseasoned, and it says bam. And I thought that you're not going to reach anybody like that, Andy. You're just not.
But I will get censored from a lot of Facebook groups doing that.
Yes.
But look, this word you said, Alice, when you said the word compliant, because it is true, they want to see what your skills are, but compliance is an important word of this new. It's always been an important word, but it's going to become an even more important word. When people talk about vaccine hesitancy, that is lack of compliance. When people talk about wear your mask or not wearing your mask, that is lack of compliance. When people talk about follow the science, that is a lack of compliance. And you can see if we follow the science with that woman and these other people that you're talking about, we are screwed. We have to not follow the science if that's what you're talking about. So how to turn a situation where this is the censorship we're experiencing is not just Google. Like our own colleagues want to not have our stuff out there. And now I understand how Google and the state are leading the charge, but we have a problem now when our fellow workers are trying to shut these same systems down or things down. So that does have to be overcome. But I do think we are in a special place here in the Bay Area. And I do think if we can make success at refusing to go forward with this digital world, which doesn't stop it, you just refuse to do it. That's not stopping it. They'll still try. But if we could build a fight here in the Bay Area, I actually think that would be very meaningful. When I think about the India farmers taking down 5G towers, like they get it. They understand there's a connection between this interconnected world, so-called interconnected world, that is literally trying to atomize their world because it's not interconnected. It's interconnected for the wealthy, not for the rest of us. So I will say that I don't know what it's going to take to reach our colleagues, and I hope to post this. And I think a lot of the websites or groups I try to post it to are either not going to accept it being posted or going to ignore it. But that that is the question I have, Jason, is what do we do to reach people? But I don't think I have an answer to that.
Well, maybe we can create like some tokens that we can offer them for watching the videos. I'm joking, of course.
It's maybe at least my approach. You know, I've joked around Eduardo and Libson how they have different approaches, and I have a third approach. My approach is different. My approach is first taking care of myself. You know, leading by example. You know, because if I lose myself, if I imprison myself in this fight and I forget to live, if I'm miserable, what the hell am I offering someone else? So I love this quote by Rosa Luxemburg. And she said that being human means throwing your whole life on the scales of destiny when need be, all the while rejoicing in every sunny day and every beautiful cloud. So to me, it's you know, yeah, you gotta fight. I'm feisty. You know, I'm not gonna back down. I'm gonna ask questions. I'm stubborn. I don't think science is objective. You know, we need to be empowered to ask questions and be wrong. And, you know, and that is a tall task, especially in this environment where we get censored. It's isolating. And, you know, you get called names, you get pushed to the side. But, you know, my act of defiance is to try to be happy. And, you know, in the midst of a fight, you know, and that's the biggest, you know, that someone else doing the, you know, the Day for Trans People. I don't remember what the exact name is. There's this organizer in Mexico City that organizes for, you know, the queer community, but also for, you know, the oppressed in general. And she said that their revenge would be to be happy. And so that, to me, in the process, we can lose ourselves in that. Otherwise, they just see mad people. They just see people that are angry, and yeah, of course, we're fatalistic, you know. But I wanna, I don't know. That's how I approach things, to just lead by example.
Well, I guess just in closing down, I wanted to mention that, so we had our first, I've been doing these little revocations of consent around various places because my background is surfacing them and saying, like, showing up at the Bluffdale Data Center or showing up at some of these places and saying, you know, it's not okay with me. And, you know, it may seem like a very small thing, but I feel like it energetically changes things, and it shows that even in small groups that we can assert our agency over the situation, even when it seems like it's something very mammoth. And so we actually, 25 of us gathered outside the Council on Foreign Relations on Easter Sunday. We did a revocation of consent on Park Avenue, and it was actually quite amazing. And the joyfulness of us all being together, and you know, we had several people like break down in tears, and a lot of them was around the kids specifically and people who are teachers. And we supported each other. And so that was quite something. So the other piece of our ceremonies, we're doing dandelions, because I feel like it's a global solidarity movement, and the dandelions are all around the globe except Antarctica. And they're medicinal, and they clean anger and bile. They're a good liver cleanse, I guess. And so taking these dandelions, I'm collecting them from all around the world, and this time we just stuffed him in a quilted pillow I made with the torn up contract and our good intentions, and we left it outside the tree pit outside the building. But of maybe scrubbing steps with them, or making soup with them, or making tea with them, or doing some other things, and trying to surface this. And I have a friend who's developing an online platform called inspiredgroundproject.com, which is still underway, but we're gonna put them up. And I would love for you guys to do something at Singularity University. Maybe not on the private grounds. I'm not asking you to get in trouble, but like, get me some dandelions and like go out there and say, like, get a picture of that newbie in VR and be like, nope, 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 nope. We're not doing this. And like, and teach a lesson. Like, I don't know, like, that's the thing, like these small, like, find the stuff and say no, because I think that there is some power in publicly saying no, saying it's not okay. And that we can do a thing. So think about it, consider it for me. And that's all I got to say. I don't know, Andy, if you want to close us out.
I'm just thankful to, well, I'm not sure. No, I'm grateful to hear this stuff. And I appreciate, Jason, the opportunity to to do this on your show or this medium. And always, Allison, I appreciate getting a better, deeper insight into what's taking place, and to also see the areas that I don't understand, you know, because we're going to have to understand this thing we're dealing with.
All right. Well, thanks,
Right.
Jason. You want to